Hello, it's Clarke Bishop. I'm an AI engineer and architect, and I work with technology leaders to build AI applications that deliver a real-world business impact. In this video, we're going to look at some interesting information recently released by Anthropic. Right at the end of 2024, a couple of really capable engineers from Anthropic published this article on building effective agents. You know, they say 2025 is going to be the year of the LLM AI agent. Well, yeah, they said 2024 would be the year of the agent too. We'll see. Either way, the article from Anthropic is excellent, and I'm going to take you through it. The first thing to notice about this article is it's based on actual work, building with dozens of teams, building large language model agents across various industries. This is real-world stuff. It's real-world lessons learned from doing the actual work. All right, so what are agents? You know, the simplest definition I use of an agent is an LLM combined with tools. But it's really a little bit more than that because it depends on how you define a tool. A tool might provide access to memory, to web search, or to other specialized useful data. Now, Anthropic has a very useful distinction here that there's two kinds of agentic type systems. Workflows, which are more prescribed than full-on agents. The difference is a workflow has been engineered. A human being thought it through and said, all right, here are the sequence of steps, or here are the things you might want to do, or here's the decision criteria. In contrast, agents rely on LLMs instead of humans to direct all their processes by using reasoning and making all the needed decisions. I really like how Anthropic talked about this next part. They recommend finding the simplest solution possible. You know, too many people want to go build an LLM agent because, well, that's the next big thing. And engineers, speaking for myself as well as other engineers, we always love to learn new things and so want to do the next new thing. But if you're looking to make a real business impact and do what makes sense for your company, then the obvious thing to do is the simplest thing possible. There's so many use cases where traditional machine learning is perfect, or even just an algorithm might work. Maybe you can do a calculation to solve the problem. If so, go that direction. We've barely scratched the surface of actual workflow-based, workflow-oriented LLM applications. It probably makes sense to be doing a lot of those, and if you haven't started building, it's time. Anthropic points out that workflows offer predictability and consistency. Well, that's certainly something everybody wants, and that continues to be a challenge with today's LLMs. They keep getting better, they keep getting closer at reasoning, but AI apps are not deterministic, and hallucinations are still a problem. LLM-based reasoning is going to be different from one run to the next. The last thing we need is to have a reasoning step that might have even more ways to go off the rails. The last thing Anthropic mentions is having an application with LLM calls and retrieval along with in-context examples. That's often enough. That's been my experience too. It's amazing how many use cases are covered by that. All right, so frameworks. This is probably the most important part of this article. Well, maybe it's the second most important. The most important is the idea that you should do the simplest things first. Whatever simple approach solves the problem, do that. The point about frameworks is kind of a corollary to keeping it simple. People get excited because there's lots of marketing dollars behind some of these different frameworks. And, oh, you need to use the XYZ framework or the Lang whatever framework. Frameworks can be useful for learning, but in practice, in the real world, the abstractions and layers of complexity that those frameworks create are just going to end up getting in the way. Anthropic recommends avoiding frameworks for most projects. There's a couple of frameworks they didn't mention here that I'll bring up because I think they have a lot of possibilities, mainly because they're very lightweight frameworks that don't try to do too much. Those two are Pydantic AI and the other one is DSPy. Pydantic, a lot of people know from Fast API, and it's already being used in a lot of LLM applications. So they've added their own agentic AI wrapper layer to it. It's pretty powerful and pretty simple and pretty lightweight. So I think it's a really good idea. DSPy, though, takes a different approach in that it looks at the prompt plus the LLM as a system. When you look at it that way, then you can optimize the system using traditional ML techniques. It's like having an automated prompt engineer, very powerful. I'm planning to do some other videos about both of these frameworks. Now, I love the diagram that Anthropic's got because it really sums up the basics. They call it an augmented LLM. It really is the secret sauce for almost all of these apps. Whether it's a workflow app, whether it's a retrieval app, whether it's a full-blown agent, really it's some input going into an LLM with hooks or options to call and use retrieval capabilities or tool capabilities or memory. A lot of times people don't think about memory, but that's very important. If you have a multi-step or multi-stage process, like in a chat type interface, you don't want the LLM asking you the same question you just asked a minute ago. You want it to actually remember for the duration of a session. Another thing that I think may be incredibly important is Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, or MCP. That's an effort to make it easy to coordinate all these interfaces between the actual LLM itself and retrieval systems of various sorts and flavors, tools, all kinds of different tools, memory, and so on. This is the same kind of thing that LangChain tries to do in a very heavyweight approach. Lots of different components, lots of different interfaces. MCP, though, is a consistent one-size-fits-all. You can think of it like an API that's designed especially for an LLM to use. Let's click on the link for the details. A couple of things about MCP. They're really direct about this. It's open source, and the point is to standardize how applications provide context to LLMs. I mean, ultimately, when you retrieve information, that's part of the context that gets passed on to the LLM. Now, tool use is a little bit different, or it might be different. You could be using a search tool, in which case you're providing context, or you could be reaching out and triggering an action. Either way, it's intended to be a standardized way to normalize all of these different interactions between an LLM and an external component. I've already mentioned MCP is open source. They give us some really nice reference implementations that are very worthwhile looking at. All kinds of different things: a file system interface, various SQL systems, development tools, web browsers, productivity apps, and Slack. Even better, it's pretty easy to add the MCP interfaces and wrapper to your own specialized system. Even though MCP is not very old, it looks to me like it's gaining an enormous amount of traction. Here's their GitHub project. They have a set of reference servers, everything from Amazon AWS knowledge-based retrieval through to, we already talked about file system, Git, GitHub, Google Drive, Google Maps, SQL stuff, Puppeteer. That's one I'm going to play with because we've got a potential web scraping use case I want to look at. Then lots and lots of different third-party integrations and community integrations. That's very impressive for a technology that's only a couple of months old, and it's all open source. Looks like it's gotten enough of that initial traction, so it seems to me that this is going to be something to really pay attention to. Back to the Anthropic article. So they take us through a bunch of different workflows. I'm not going to spend too much time on all of this, just the high points. Prompt chaining is very straightforward. Step-by-step workflows. Do this and do this and do that. You can have a gate to decide on a bit of conditional logic if needed. Workflow routing is where you actually use an LLM to route which path the system follows. Parallelization, where you want to do things in parallel. The other thing that's really nice about the article is that it gives you different examples of when you might use each workflow. Voting, for example, where you want to run the process multiple times, then pick the best one. There's an orchestration workflow. Like, for example, you might want to do a bunch of web searches and then research and analyze each of the results that come back. And the last of the workflow options, an evaluator optimizer. I'm very interested in evaluation, and I'm planning to do some other videos specifically on this topic. I mentioned DSPy before. That's one of the central skills to use DSPy, evaluation. Here's the problem. If you can't measure, you can't improve. So if you want to improve your systems and how well they work, we have to evaluate because we need to make sure that there's not too much hallucination or other unwanted results in the output. Evaluator Optimizer is an example of an evaluation process where you're actually using an LLM to evaluate another AI LLM-based system. Last but by no means least, agents. The LLM takes the instructions provided by a human, identifies an appropriate action, it does some thinking, some reasoning along the way, or tries to, takes an action, interacts with the environment where it has access, and then gets feedback from the results of the action it took in that environment. At that point, it can either decide to take further actions, get more feedback, or decide that it's accomplished its purpose and stop. I wanted to be sure and give credit and thanks to Erik, Schluntz, sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, and Zhang. Your article really sums up some excellent ideas, and I'm glad that Anthropic published the information. I thought their 3 core principles were right on target. Number 1, simplicity. Yep, we've already covered that. Number 2, transparency. Be explicit. Know about the planning stage. This fits with the evaluation process I mentioned earlier. And number 3, documentation and testing. Testing, more evaluation, more testing to make sure that the system is doing what it is you actually want. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'm going to do more of these videos. I'll put my LinkedIn profile in the description, along with links to the different things that I showed you today. If you have particular suggestions or requests, get in touch, let me know, and have a great day.